Memory is a very live topic.
Profesor Chomsky, John Tomlinson ha hablado de la homogeneización cultural por la que atravesamos. ¿Cuál cree que sea el efecto de esta sobre la capacidad creativa de los seres humanos? ¿A dónde puede llevar esta globalización? ¿Será que su única consecuencia va a ser un patrón universal de consumo? Professor Chomsky, John Tomlinson has spoken of the cultural homogenization we are going through. What do you think is the effect of it on the creative capacity of human beings? Where can this globalization lead? Will the only consequence be a universal pattern of consumption?
Well, first of all, this tendency towards a kind of uniformity or homogenization has been going on for centuries. I mean, take, say, Europe. We talk about a language, just keep the language for a moment, but the same is much more general. We say that there's an Italian language and a French language and a German language and so on, but that's highly artificial. I mean, if you go back, depending on the country, 1 or 2 generations, people living inside those countries spoke languages which were not mutually intelligible. I mean, even today, there are plenty of people in Italy who can't talk to their grandmothers because they speak different languages. The one that's called Italian has become a national language, was in fact the local dialect near Florence. And there are Italian dialects, so-called dialects. They're actually separate languages spread all over the place, and they're rapidly disappearing thanks to the creation of a national culture of television, of schooling, of travel, and so on. And that's happening all over Europe. The number of, I remember 30 or 40 years ago, I had a graduate student who was working on German, and he wanted to go to Germany after he got his degree, and he had to get a job. So he got a job in a German city in which he was teaching German to local students, because their dialect was not, though they were in Germany, they couldn't understand what was called German, and Germans couldn't understand them. And that's true, in most of the world. I mean, it is becoming more uniform, but it's been happening for a long time. And there is an increasing uniformity of sharing of culture. On the other hand, there are counter tendencies as well. So take Europe again. I suppose in reaction to the centralization of the European Union, there has been a revival of regional cultures, regional languages, regional practices, and so on, often very lively. So take, say, in Spain, for example, Catalan, in fact, all local languages were suppressed under the Franco dictatorship. But after Franco died, they reemerged, and by now are quite lively. In the Basque country, the language is being revived. It was spoken mostly by people off in hills, and it's, in fact, being, in a sense, even created as a new language. In Catalonia, it is the language of Catalonia, but it goes well beyond that. I remember maybe 20 years ago, I was visiting Barcelona, and I happened to be there on a weekend, and the hotel where I was staying was near the central square where the big cathedral is. And on Sunday morning, people were streaming into the square. There's a weekly performance of folk music, folk dancing, Catalan practices, and so on. I've seen the same things in Scotland. Wales, the Welsh language has revived, and you hear children speaking it in the streets. And this is happening in much of Europe, and I think it's a healthy development. It varies from place to place. There are both tendencies towards uniformity and homogeneity, and also tendencies towards revival and preservation of local cultures, history, language, art, and so on, which I think is a very healthy development. Will it lead towards a kind of universal consumerism? Well, that's really a choice. Actually, I don't think it can. Consumerism is not a natural property of human life. It has been driven by massive propaganda and by social engineering practices. So let's say take the United States, the home of consumerism. Back in the 1920s, it was began to be understood by the corporate system that there's too much freedom has been won by popular struggle for them to control the population by force. The same thing was realized in Britain at about the same time. I mean, the franchise was extending. There were women were beginning to be able to vote. There were parliamentary labor parties and so on. People had won a lot of freedom. They couldn't be controlled by force. So it was understood that it's going to become necessary to control people by shaping their attitudes and beliefs. That's the core of what we call the public relations industry. It's by now a huge industry, developed first in the freest countries in the world, the United States and Britain, with a very specific design of controlling people's attitudes and beliefs and shaping them. And one leading feature of it was to try to direct people to what were called the superficial things of life, like fashionable consumption. The idea is that if you can drive people towards individual consumption as the highest goal in life, then they're under control. It breaks down collective interests and needs. It means that people go into debt, that they're just looking after themselves, they don't care about other people, and they're scattered, they can't act politically, they can't function as human beings in a community. It undermines democracy. And all of these things are very positive from the point of view of concentrated power, business power. And a huge amount of money goes into this and effort. I mean, probably 1/6 of the American economy is just devoted to marketing, to trying to create consumers, sometimes called fabricating consumers, and driving people into satisfying created individual wants at the expense of collective needs. And this is connected with huge social engineering projects. So the suburbanization of America from the 1950s was a planned program by corporations and the government to try to scatter people, to destroy the inner city, to drive people to reliance on having cars instead of mass transportation, to breaking down the kinds of communities that grow in urban environments and so on. And it just changed the country enormously. It's also completely unviable. If it continues, it's just going to destroy the planet. There is no way for the human species to survive unless it moves from this kind of crazed consumerism and waste to some sort of a sustainable environment. I mean, a very simple point is just transportation. I mean, markets have built-in inefficiencies. They are quite inefficient by nature, contrary to propaganda. One kind of inefficiency is actually what's causing the current financial crisis, but it's a side point. But one serious inefficiency of markets is that the markets do not offer the choices that people prefer. So to be concrete, I have to go home tonight after work, and the market offers me a choice between, a Ford and a Toyota, but it does not offer me the choice between a car and a subway. That's a collective choice. It has to be in a democratic society, it would be a choice made by a functioning democratic community. But it's not available on the market. And that means I'd prefer to go home that way. It would save me a lot of time, money, everything else, but the market doesn't allow it. And that